Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Imagine two countries, both peaceful by nature, each with a proud history and strong national identity. Now picture a small, frozen, remote rock in the North Atlantic Ocean, uninhabited, harsh, and seemingly insignificant to most. Yet this tiny island sparked a surprising clash between Canada and Denmark, a dispute so unusual that it captured international headlines and even threatened to escalate into a serious conflict. The story is far from what you'd expect. This wasn't about vast territories or valuable resources. It was about pride, sovereignty, and the complex rules that govern how nations claim land. The question is, did Canada and Denmark truly come to the brink of war over this barren island? And if so, what can this strange episode teach us about the nature of modern territorial disputes, where history, law, and even a bit of humor collide? Join me as we unravel this fascinating tale of diplomacy, nationalism, and the curious ways countries stake their claims, ultimately showing how even the smallest piece of land can reveal much larger truths about the world we live in. Hans Island is a tiny, barren speck of land, just about 1.3 square kilometers, nestled in the icy waters of the Nares Strait, the narrow channel that separates Greenland, which belongs to Denmark, from Canada's Ellesmere Island. Despite its small size and harsh environment, the island holds outsized significance. Strategically, it sits in a critical spot controlling access to Arctic waters, a region growing ever more important due to melting ice opening new shipping routes and resource opportunities. But beyond the practical, Hans Island is a potent symbol of sovereignty and national pride for both nations. The complexity arises from a legal gray area left unresolved for decades. In 1973, Canada and Denmark signed a maritime boundary treaty to define their respective territories in the Arctic, but deliberately left Hans Island's ownership ambiguous, creating a no-man's land in legal terms. This omission planted the seeds for future diplomatic and symbolic tussles, as each country quietly laid claim to the island without settling the dispute through clear international law. This ambiguity set the stage for the curious saga that would unfold. In the early 1980s, what started as a quiet dispute over Hans Island quickly took on a playful, almost surreal character. Canadian troops were the first to make a symbolic move. They landed on the island, planted the Canadian flag firmly in the frozen ground, and left behind a bottle of Canadian whiskey as a cheeky calling card. Not to be outdone, Danish forces soon responded by removing the Canadian flag, raising their own Danish flag, and leaving a bottle of schnapps in return. What followed was a series of back-and-forth visits where each side would quietly reclaim the island, swap flags, and leave behind their national liquor as a humorous gesture of sovereignty. This odd ritual unfolded over years, with neither side escalating tensions but rather engaging in a kind of diplomatic prank. The media caught wind of this unique standoff and quickly dubbed it the Whisky War, highlighting how the dispute was less about aggression and more about national pride expressed with a wink. In many ways, this was perhaps the politest conflict in world history, a dispute marked not by threats or violence, but by good-natured humor and a respect for diplomacy. The Whisky War became a symbol of how even serious territorial issues can sometimes be navigated with a bit of levity and mutual understanding. As the Whisky War carried on, it became clear that beneath the humor and good-natured gestures lay serious legal and political stakes. Neither Canada nor Denmark was willing to back down, because the Arctic region was rapidly growing in strategic importance. Climate change was melting the ice, opening up new shipping lanes and access to vast untapped natural resources like oil and gas. Control over even a tiny piece of land like Hans Island could strengthen a country's claim over surrounding waters and the valuable resources they might contain. National pride also played a powerful role. For Canadians and Danes alike, Hans Island became more than just a remote rock. It was a symbol of sovereignty and identity. Public sentiment in both countries strongly supported maintaining claims, making it politically difficult for leaders to compromise or concede. Canadian and Danish officials have spoken about the dispute in ways that balanced firm resolve with respect for diplomacy. Canadian diplomats emphasized their commitment to protecting the nation's Arctic interests, while Danish representatives highlighted their responsibility to Greenland and the integrity of their maritime boundaries. International law, especially under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, provides frameworks for resolving such disputes peacefully. UNCLOS encourages countries to negotiate boundaries, use arbitration, or bring disputes before international courts rather than resorting to force. The Hans Island situation became a textbook case in balancing national interest with peaceful diplomacy, showcasing how even symbolic conflicts are guided by legal principles and international cooperation. After nearly 5 decades of playful flag planting and symbolic liquor exchanges, Canada and Denmark finally brought the Hans Island dispute to a peaceful and formal close. In June 2022, the two nations announced a historic agreement. They would divide Hans Island roughly down the middle, creating the world's friendliest land border. The decision was reached after years of quiet diplomacy, mutual respect, and growing recognition of the need to cooperate in the increasingly strategic Arctic region. The resolution was marked by a symbolic handshake between officials from both countries, standing side by side on the very rock that had sparked their lighthearted standoff. It was an image that resonated around the world, proof that even in an age of rising global tensions, diplomacy and goodwill could still triumph. Beyond its local significance, the peaceful settlement of the Hans Island dispute set a powerful precedent. It became a model for how nations can resolve territorial disagreements without hostility, through negotiation, compromise, and respect for international law. In a time when global powers are vying for influence in the Arctic, the agreement also strengthened Canada and Denmark's cooperative stance in the region, laying the groundwork for future partnerships on climate, Indigenous rights, and sustainable development. Ultimately, Hans Island went from being a quirky diplomatic footnote to a shining example of how modern geopolitics can work, not with sabers rattling, but with hands extended. The legacy of the so-called Whisky War extends far beyond the icy shores of Hans Island. What began as a quirky flag-swapping ritual between two friendly nations evolved into an international meme, celebrated for its absurdity, civility, and charm. Online, the story gained viral traction. Images of soldiers exchanging liquor and raising flags on a frozen rock became symbols of peaceful conflict resolution in a world often dominated by more aggressive headlines. The humor wasn't lost on the public, and Hans Island found a strange kind of fame. Tourists, adventurers, and academics alike became fascinated with this tiny island that had sparked such a light-hearted diplomatic tug-of-war. In classrooms and diplomatic circles, the Whisky War is now cited as a textbook case of how restraint, mutual respect, and even humor can de-escalate tensions. It showed that symbolic gestures, like a bottle of whiskey or schnapps, can carry powerful messages in the realm of geopolitics. Instead of sabers or sanctions, Canada and Denmark used civility and creativity to express sovereignty without igniting conflict. Most importantly, the Hans Island dispute reminded the world that diplomacy doesn't have to be dry or hostile. It can be respectful, strategic, and even a little fun. In an era when international disputes often spiral into gridlock or aggression, the story of Hans Island offers a refreshing and instructive example of how nations can handle their differences, with both seriousness and a smile. In the end, the story of Hans Island stands as a testament to how diplomacy doesn't always have to be stiff or combative. Two NATO allies, Canada and Denmark, demonstrated that even territorial disputes can be handled with civility, creativity, and yes, a little liquor. No shots were fired, no threats exchanged, just a quiet, symbolic back and forth that ended in a handshake and a shared border on a frozen rock. It's a reminder that in a world full of high-stakes conflicts and rising tensions, peaceful resolution is not only possible, it can be powerful. Sometimes it's not about who raises the flag first, but who's willing to lower it in the yao, spirit of cooperation. Now we want to hear from you. Should more border disputes be solved this way, with symbolic gestures and mutual respect? What's the weirdest or most surprising border conflict you've come across? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed this dive into one of the politest conflicts in history. And if you're curious to learn more, check out our other videos. Canada's Forgotten Military. Conflicts. Exploring the lesser-known chapters of Canadian military history. How countries claim the Arctic. A look into the geopolitical chessboard unfolding in the far north. Borders that don't make sense. Bizarre. and mind-bending boundaries from around the world. Thanks for watching and stay curious.